Welcome back to the second day of this workshop on controlling immigration. We're still working on the PowerPoints here, but I think we're going to be ready to go in just a minute. I don't know if there's anyone coming from the outside, but if you are external to the group, welcome to this session. We're starting with Germany and the Netherlands, and these are two countries that we put in this category of countries of immigration. Slightly different from France and Britain, which we did yesterday afternoon, but in some ways I think the Dutch and the German chapters go together well. So the first person up is one of the co-authors, co-editors of the book, a colleague, Philip Martin from Cal Davis, and he's going to walk us through the German case, and then we're going to have some commentary by Friedrich Heckmann and Ingrid Tucci, I think. Okay? Phil, where are you?
Okay, so thank you, Jim, and I want to say this is co-authored with Dietrich. Thränhardt, who's going to be coming up here in a few minutes, and I've certainly discussed it with Friedrich throughout. So basically, there's sort of three takeaways. Germany has a little over 10% of Europe's people, has almost a quarter of the EU's GDP, and has about 1 out of 6 of the international migrants in Europe, at least as defined by the United Nations DESA. And Germany was, we put in the reluctant land of immigration category because what happened is that Germany did not have a lot of ex-colonies, though it did absorb a lot of people from what had been Eastern Europe after World War II. But the German economy boomed. There was guest worker recruitment, you all know. The guests were expected to leave, but they were allowed to settle with their families. Many of them did. And so there was this period of roughly 25 years after the guest worker era when Germany was a country of immigration, although political leaders basically said it's not a country of immigration. There had been in 1979 a person commissioned to write a report who recommended birthright citizenship and integration, but the policy really was contradictory. On the one hand, encourage people to return, but on the other hand, integrate those who elect to settle. That, by the way, was also the main recommendation of ILO Convention 143 in 1975, which was impose employer sanctions in order to reduce illegal migration, but nonetheless integrate those who elected to stay. 1989 was the turning point with the upsurge of migration, and then it really took a government elected, I think, in 1998 to bring about some changes that included the changes to naturalization law, an independent commission, and finally the recognition that Germany was and should be a country of immigration. Remember that so-called Sussman Commission recommended the Canadian-style system, that is, select people on the basis of human capital, even though the Canadians have now moved to put much more emphasis on a US-style thing of employer sponsorship and Canadian job experience, but that's another story. And Germany has been a country that takes slow steps in the direction of opening up. So, for example, the green card system that was mentioned yesterday had tough requirements, and even the 2005 Act had relatively tough requirements for people to come in as skilled foreigners. Keep in mind, on the H-1B program in the United States, 2/3 of all the people who come as H-1Bs, we have a 4-tiered wage system, so-called prevailing wage system. 2/3 of them are in category 1 or 2, near the bottom. So we always talk about the best and brightest, but the best and brightest would be level 4. Very few people are considered by their employers to be level 4. Anyway, the 2005 opened up more explicitly to foreign graduates of German universities and other things. And also, of course, and this is typical of the reforms, on the one hand you're opening, on the other hand you're trying to toughen. In this case it was saying that you needed to start learning German so that you have a better chance in the labor market. Germany was the country that really took the lead in doing labor market reforms. It was really not, like the 1996 welfare reforms in the United States, it was not necessarily aimed at migrants per se. It was aimed at getting a lot of people back to work, but it had implications for migrants as well. Keep in mind that 1996 in the United States, 11% of the people in the United States were immigrants born in another country. Almost half of the savings from welfare reform came from denying welfare benefits to immigrants. Now, those were rolled back in the 90s, so we never got to, it was 48% of the estimated cost savings. And there was some of the same thing here. Mrs. Merkel, as in 2005, agreed with a lot of the polls that said Germany has enough foreigners, and she held a lot of integration summits. We'll hear about that. Then we had the debate with Mr. Sarrazin about whether or not Turks and Muslims are integrating or not. And then, of course, you'll hear much more about 2015, and Germany can open up to asylum seekers. So I think the end result is the glass half full or half empty. The labor market reform certainly got a lot of people into work. What are the long-run implications for the major political parties of these big changes? And I think the real question at the end is, will we look back in 2030 and say that the decisions in 2015 were great decisions or terrible decisions? Okay, to now run through the picture. So there were a lot of people who moved from the east to what was then West Germany in the immediate years after the war. There was the economic miracle. There was Germany being the founding member of both the European coal and steel community as well as the European economic community. And then, of course, Germany became the prototypical guest worker country in bringing in lots of foreign workers. I mean, the important thing, there were a whole lot of arguments about why the German economy boomed so much in the 1960s. And Dieter and I went back and forth on this, but one of the things that really has always struck me was how undervalued the Deutschmark was in the 1960s. So what should have happened is when you gave $1 US, you should have gotten 3 Deutschmarks or 3.5, and instead you got 6. So that's why a whole lot of American investment came over to Europe, and it created a huge number of jobs. And then in the United States, we had Lyndon Johnson saying, we're going to have both guns and butter. We're going to fight the Vietnam War, and we're going to expand the welfare state. So that created a huge demand for things like Volkswagen's manufactured goods that Germany was really good at. And so what happened, we had a French guy, I think his name was Servan Schreiber or something, who wrote about the American challenge to European identity because of the multinationals bringing their capital across the Atlantic. Well, that created lots of jobs, brought in lots of guest workers, and the Turks were the ones who came in large numbers very near the end of the process, and they wound up being considered much more so than the other groups, as it were the problem guest workers. And so you had these stories that went from optimism about guest workers to pessimism, and in many things, of course, you can switch too far to one side or the other. But I think the remarkable thing is that in the 1980s, you had both the leading political parties or candidates of political parties saying that we can't take any more, or we have to reduce rather than increase the number of Turks. So it wasn't just necessarily a small fringe. These were the chancellors at the time. Net migration began to rise after 1985, as you can see in the red little line. And then, of course, we had the Berlin Wall falling, which set off the east-west migration. A lot of ethnic Germans, Aussiedler, who came. And they, of course, came as German citizens. But the big, probably a big turning point was 1992 and the breakup of Yugoslavia. So what happened in order to solve that problem? Well, a whole lot of things happened. This is when you could do a lot of things like have the first state country be the country that takes the application and makes the decision. Of course, Dayton Peace Accords helped a lot as well. But the basic idea was this was an asylum problem that actually did get more or less solved. After that, we shifted political parties, and then came the Sussman Commission, and it was at in the same sort of era that this migration law was passed, and the theory was you're going to attract skilled foreigners, and as I mentioned, you're simultaneously going to promote the integration of especially low-skilled foreigners receiving public assistance who were going to learn German and therefore do better in the German labor market. So Germany had changed its labor laws. A lot of Southern Europeans moved north because the German economy did much better than the Greek or Spanish or Portuguese or Italian economies in the aftermath of the 2008-9 recession. But the real story that animates a lot of discussion of Germany now is really the aftermath of the so-called Arab Spring in 2011. And really it was more about one particular country, Syria. And I always think the remarkable statistic was that, I think it was 2015, UNHCR had a budget of $7 billion US to take care of what they considered at the time 14 million refugees. Germany was spending about $7 billion for roughly the same number of people who had just come in. You know how the system worked. All those little islands off the Turkey's western coast, everybody going up north through the Balkans. I always liked all the signs that people had in English saying, we actually don't want to stay in Hungary, we want to go to Germany. And the whole idea of the Hungarians not doing it let Mrs. Merkel make her famous statement about we can do it. It made her very, very popular with Time magazine, among others. I don't know how many migrants carried the pictures of her, but as near as I can tell, the single peak day was a Saturday in September when a little over 12,000 people arrived in one day. And most people welcomed the migrants coming in. There was an enormous amount of volunteer effort to help people. In fact, there was an older woman who had studied in Germany after the war, actually went to Germany, American, and also helped out at some of the distribution centers. And I think the remarkable thing wasn't just in Germany, it was also in Austria, and I assume in Sweden as well, enormous amount of volunteer effort to help people in need as they came through. And of course, it's the famous selfie pictures with Merkel when she visited a camp. There were also, of course, attacks, and not everybody said, this is great. And that kind of was accentuated by the terrorist attacks first in Paris, and then there was the Cologne train station, led to, as you know, the Turkey agreement in March of 2016. So where are things? So with the help of Dietrich, if you look at 2016, you had 2/3 of Germans in the labor force, or 2/3 of all people in Germany in the labor force, about 8% unemployed. Foreigners had a lower labor force participation rate, a higher unemployment rate, and a little under 20% were receiving some kind of social assistance. The people from the main asylum countries had a very low labor force participation rate, a much higher unemployment rate, and about 1/3 on some sort of social assistance. Now, we update to 2019, we actually have an even higher share of all people in the labor force, a much lower unemployment rate. We still have the foreigners' labor force participation rate being much, much lower. The unemployment rate being higher, but not as high as it was, and the fraction of people receiving social assistance down. But from those main countries, we have under 30% who are employed, about 16% unemployed, and a lot receiving some kind of social assistance. So the issue is, in a demographic sense, people may want more workers, but remember when a nation of immigrants talks about immigrants, they talk about immigrants benefiting us rather than us benefiting them. I mean, if they're victims to whom we have to help, it can be much harder to get assistance as opposed to saying they're people who are going to come in, they're going to succeed, they're going to benefit us. So we know that the asylum crisis the peak has passed. We know that a lot of German employers say that they need skilled workers. You know, lack of skilled workers will hold back economic growth. And so Germany has yet a new law that was just passed, which once again will make it easier for non-EU skilled foreigners to come, also speed up the process of removing people who don't stay. And I think there are two last slides here to make points that we heard yesterday. One is that in many countries, this is the Pew thing that just came out, in many countries, in almost all countries, people favor the admission of highly skilled migrants, even if they oppose the low skilled. And this doesn't take a lot of analysis. High skilled people have high salaries. They pay more in taxes than they get back in benefits. So it's fairly easy to understand why people, according to opinion polls, people favor high skill. But in both the United States and Germany, a higher share of native-born adults have post-secondary education than of foreign-born adults. Okay? And that's not true of Canada and Australia. They have point selection systems and they're selecting on that basis. So the question is always, I think we heard it yesterday, a country would be stupid if it did not accept or even try to get global talent. Hard to define global talent, but roughly speaking, years of education is a good proxy. So highly skilled people earn a lot. They can have externalities and contribute positively. The real issue is low skilled. And the issue with low skilled is, do you slot them into your current labor market, make them pay from the beginning? Or do you try to first give them the human capital they lack so that they can fit in to the labor market as it now exists, and therefore you won't aggravate inequality and all kinds of other things. So the takeaway, of course, on all this is we do have lots of challenges. The big issue for Germany is making a decision to take an enormous number of relatively low-skilled people in a relatively shorter period of time, and then deciding now in 2019, is that glass of water half full, so that this is an optimistic way that this will proceed, or is it half empty, so that people will look back and say what a problem this might be. So that is my part of Germany, and now I think it's Dietrich's.
So why don't you stay up here?
It's easier to see from down below.
Okay, all right.
Yes, we had this beautiful picture yesterday by François showing us the ups and downs, and here you have it again. So the same is the case with the political climate in Germany. Sometimes it's quite optimistic, as we just heard of the 2015 Munich, the welcome culture, and sometimes it's very pessimistic. If you go back to the beginning of the century, there is economic pessimism. The Economist writes, has a title, Germany, the laggard of the euro, the problem of the euro, and investments go out to the new member states, Poland and others, and there's pessimism in Germany. There's also strife up to the, in the 20th century, always severe conflict between the left and the right about especially asylum policies, and the climax of these conflicts is the discussion about the law, the Jus Soli law, which was introduced in 1999, that gives children born in Germany with one parent at least there for 8 years the citizenship. A breakthrough, I think, in the German system. And as Martin told us already, then there is a change, and the parties come together under Merkel's leadership. There's a grand coalition since 2005 up to now, with a short interruption. And you have a culture, I would say, a culture of integration summits, German Islam Conference, national integration plans. In Bavaria you have even a stamp, integration stamp, which you can put on postcards, but it has no value. Merkel's popularity is very high in these years. Just before the asylum crisis, it's at its height, and she can invest her political capital in the migration crisis. You have these symbolic events with the Minister of the Interior, the German Islam Conference, and you have a new labeling instead of all the categories, asylum seekers, refugees, Aussiedler, and so on, you get a new category, people with migration background. So everybody is brought under the same umbrella. And especially that's important because it's the end of the ethnic Aussiedler policy, the privilege of the Aussiedler, and so everybody is brought under the same labeling. The EU privilege is enforced, and now in our legal system, EU citizens are no longer considered Ausländer, but they have a special status and there are special laws regulating EU and non-EU people. You have, Friedrich will tell more about it in a few seconds. You have integration courses, mandatory integration courses, and the theory which is widely popular in Germany in these years and up to now is that in the past we made mistakes, we didn't integrate the guest workers properly, but now the state comes in and integrates by state programs. If you look into it more exactly, you see that in the guest worker area there were language programs, and in some years even more language programs than today, but the image is we make it new and it gives this policy support, and so there is an optimistic climate with respect to integration. The underside of this discourse is of course that some groups are should especially be integrated, severely integrated. They lack integration, and this is the anti-Muslim tide which you find in many countries. We come to the refugee crisis. The interesting thing about Merkel is that it took quite a long time until she came up positively. This is this famous picture of her talking to a Palestinian refugee child, telling her we cannot take everybody. And she was criticized, and you have kind of crowd climate in the media. So sometimes in the Saratin, you were talking about the Saratin book, the Spiegel magazine, Bild Zeitung, all these popular papers were very much anti-Muslim. In 2015, suddenly you establish the welcome culture, and everybody joins, especially the media, and so Merkel is drawn to this decision. The media come first, the public climate come first, and she is relatively late, but then she comes in decisively, and she becomes a symbol of the welcome culture, and also internationally, Trump helps a bit. Then she becomes a symbol of internationalism, and this goes on for only a short time. Then she changes her policies without explaining it to the German public, and she says, for instance, that's a national endeavor to get some of these people back. So the new mantra is now what we call Fluchtursachenbekämpfung, redirection of development policies, and there is a big discussion that 2015 must not happen again. As Martin already said, the civil society was very welcoming and is still very welcoming. That's not reflected in the newspapers, in the media so much now, but if you look at the numbers of volunteers, it's still very, very high and quite stable, and it goes through all realms of life. Some reporter said it's an explosion of solidarity, And if you compare it to other events, it's really quite unique. The local government, the state governments were quite effective in this process, but we had a big problem with the central agency in the BAMF, the Agency for Migration and Refugees. They were not able even to register the refugees, and this contributed to a climate, to a problem climate in Germany, so that people had the impression that the government had lost control, since they even couldn't register. Still, in 2 years later, they did it, and you can see the percentages that Germany takes in quite a lot of refugees, and it's the situation. You can say the glass is half full, half empty, but the refugees are there, and now the policy is to get them into work. In Germany, all specialists say it's relatively successful, because maybe that's different in the United States. People came here without any German language knowledge, most people, and so it's quite difficult to integrate them. So the government is working, there are programs, and of course many, as you already said, many people are still dependent on welfare or unemployment benefits. Behind this story, this refugee story, which is prominent in the media, in politics, is the other story, that's the great these high numbers of Europeans going to Germany, and they are of course working from the first day on, especially Poles. Since 3 years, Romanians have taken the lead, and you see that lots of people from the new member states are coming to Germany. The numbers from southern Europe are not so high. They are in the German press, they are quite prominent, because people have more affection, or the media have more affection for Italians than for Romanians. But the big thing is the migration from the new member states to Germany, and this is very positive for the German economy, because this shortage of the labor force, the demographic problems, is now biting, and it's biting severely. Thank you.